Hey, it's Jeremy again, and welcome back to Blender for Designers. I'm not even going to really use Blender that much. I'm actually going to use a program for After Effects called Element 3D from Video Copilot. And that lets me bring in my Blender models into After Effects, and it works really nicely. So I'm going to go into Blender. This is a model I created last time, just the basic box. And I created it in UV unwrapped it. So go to that tutorial. I'll put a little link to that if you want to figure out how to make this. But right now I'm going to show you how to get it into Element 3D. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to export this model. You probably remember me saying that when you get to a certain point, you can just export this. You don't need to go on with the render if you're just going to use an element. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select it by right-clicking it. And then I'm going to go to File, Export. And I want to export an OBJ file. That's what Element reads. So I'm just going to call this basic box1.obj. And very important to hit selection only, otherwise it'll export your entire scene, and I don't want that. I definitely want to apply modifiers. I don't want animation. I want to include edges, write normals, include UVs, write materials, and object is OBJ groups. Oh, and then one other thing, I want to scale this thing up. I'm going to scale it up by 50. They tend to come in a little small when you bring it into Elements, so I'm going to scale it up. She might be scaling it up to 100. Clean, nice, even factor of 10. So then hit Export OBJ. And I'm going to hide Blender and go to After Effects. And here in After Effects, I'm going to go to my project and I'm going to create a new composition. And I'm going to do it 1920 by 1080. And the background I'm going to have is white. 23.976 frames per second and 10 seconds. 10 seconds should be fine. We're going to be doing mostly stills. And I'm going to hit OK. So there's my comp. And then I'm going to create a new solid, layer new solid. And we're going to call this E3D. And I'm going to make this fuchsia because that's the color I like to make my element. And I'm going to go to Video Copilot. Element 3D, or just element. And then I'm going to go to my scene setup, and I'm going to import that model. So there it is, basic box1.obj. And I'm actually not going to load the material. And I'm going to put the model alignment on the bottom. And there we go. Actually, it's quite big. Probably shouldn't have gone 100, but it's fine. So there's my box. And actually, you can use the middle mouse button to kind of move around like you do in Blender. And then, of course, you can move the box itself. But I'm going to keep it centered because I'm just going to use it in After Effects. So I'm going to use the Gummy Monkeys. Gummy Monkey No Dies here. And I can just slot that in to the material. So I go to Box 1. So you actually, if you name the materials in Blender, it'll keep the names. So I'm going to put the Gummy Monkeys No Dies here in the diffuse. And I have draft textures on, so it looks a little fuzzy, but it's a good idea. It's a good preview of what you got. And then I'm going to, it's a little glossy. Not a big glossy, but a little glossy. So I'm going to turn it down to 75%, maybe 60%. I'm actually going to add a little bit of reflectivity, like 3% or something. And I'm also going to change the environment. In this case, I'm going to use one of the Element 3D environments, one of the backlight environments. But I'm going to turn down the saturation a bit. And then I'm going to hit OK. And there we have our box in the Element 3D comp. Unfortunately, it's really big and kind of awkwardly placed. But that's easy to fix. To fix that, we just create a camera. So we go to Layer, New Camera. And I'm going to create a 50mm camera. Pretty standard. So you hit the C to get the camera tool. And then having a 3-button mouse is an advantage here because you can use the middle mouse button to bring that there. And the right mouse button to dolly out. And then orbit around a little bit till you get some framing that you like. And you can see this is great because it renders super, super fast. but not loving the way this is lit. But luckily that's also easy to change. So we can go into element and we can go to render settings. Both physical environment and lighting is going to be our options here. And I want to play with, just let down a bunch of these things. So first of all, lighting, I want to lower the gamma, raise the exposure, and then show you the physical environment. Then you can rotate it around a bit. And rotate the camera a bit. I think it's a little harsh on the front. So one thing I should explain is Blender and After Effects have different ways of describing Y and Z. And it's unfortunately kind of confusing. But basically, the up and down value in Blender, that's the Z. In After Effects, that's the Y. And then again, the forward and back. In Blender, that's the Y. In After Effects, that's the Z. You'll just kind of have to get used to it. But luckily, the OBJ export totally works just fine. So I'll rotate using these new Y and Z values. And actually, there's going to be some lights here. So I'm going to rotate that light as well. Yeah, it's kind of cool. It gives a nice shape there. It feels like an object. And then we want to kind of groundness to this as well. So I'm going to go to scene setup, and I'm going to add a ground, which I'm just going to be a plane. And we're just going to, so we're going to do that up 1,000%. Actually, maybe even 2,000%. And then here's a neat little feature to Element. First of all, you can do reflections. So I can go to the model, reflection, mirror surface. And then when I turn up the reflectivity, it reflects. But it's also reflecting the background, which is fine, I guess. I'm actually going to turn this down. Well, I'll turn it to 30, but then I'll turn the glossiness down a bit. That's more of a shaded reflection. But as I said, it's also reflecting the background. But that's not really a big problem because I'm going to do something cool called matte reflection. I'm also going to use matte shadow. So this actually is going to comp right in to the background. And it's actually going to be transparent if you export it. So there you go. Woo, that's cool. All right, so I'm going to back up a little bit. And we can just set that there. And I'm actually going to put a little bit of shading there. And I'm going to use shading. I'm going to use something called ambient occlusion. It's another one of those 3D jargon terms. But it basically means shading, kind of, it's a fake shading that happens when objects are near each other. It just creates some darkness. So I'm just going to take the intensity down to 1.5, and I'm going to take the radius down to 0.4. And so there's a little ground shadow there. And that's a box. So, you can export that if you hit Command-Shift-S to export a still instead of a movie. And you can export a PNG. We can export that too, we can call it box export 1. So that's pretty cool, and it makes that wonderful noise. But we're going to go back into the comp, and I'm actually going to do something which is kind of fun. So I'm going to take that texture that we had, Gummy Monkeys No Dies, and then I'm going to bring it into After Effects, and I'm going to drag it onto a comp to create its own comp. And ooh, yeah, there we see we have the die lines. And then we're instead of calling it that, we're just going to call it die line. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to comp 1, and I'm going to drag die line back here. Now you can see it back there, but we just need it in the comp. We can hide it. Now you can see actually this is, actually reminds me, this is actually transparent. So then I'm going to go into Element 3D, not into the program itself. I'm just going to go into Custom Layers. I'm going to use a custom texture map. And for that, I'm going to use die line. And the way that's going to work is now in the diffuse for the box, instead of using that image, I'm going to use texture map. And sometimes this shows up and sometimes it doesn't. But don't worry about it. It will actually show up here. But what's extra specially cool about this is that we can now edit this texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go split the view here. I'm going to create a new viewer. So we're just going to see that box. And I'm going to go back to my die line. And you can see now that I can manipulate this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new solid. Command Y creates a solid. Now it's all white. And then I'm going to create a path here. So I can white this out. Because let's say we want to get rid of that red bar. So you can see this updates as I update. And so I can change the die line. So if I don't like that look, I can update it and I can create a text layer. And, you can use all the techniques in After Effects here. You can import images, you can do whatever. Berry flavor, and I'm going to make that red like this. And there, that's a bit sleeker, isn't it? Yeah. So it's just berry flavor. Yeah, and then we can, we can tweak anything we want. And then we can also duplicate that, bring it on the side. So that's cool. But also what's kind of cool is because After Effects is in fact an animation program, you can do different alternates as different animations. So, or as different frames in the animation. So let's say I want to keep the original as well. So I'm going to do this new one, and I'm just going to have that go one frame. So option forward bracket means it's one frame. So there we go. So you have two different options, and we can present them to a client or whatever. And then another thing you can do if you're doing packaging is let's bring this back. So I'm actually going to, so what you can do is if you want to change, I'm going to bring Art and Art 2 together. I'm going to call this actually Gummy Monkeys 2. All right, the reason I'm doing that, and I'll explain this in a minute, is because you can import separate layers into After Effects. So you can actually import Illustrator files into After Effects. So I'm just going to say I want a composition. So by doing that, it creates this composition. Of course, they use a black background by default, so let's put a white one in there. Anyway, now we got all these layers in After Effects. So I'm just going to copy Art 2 and Layer 1. So I'm going to hit Copy, and then I'm going to bring them into our die line layer. Hit Paste. Now you may notice they're a bit small, which is fine, because what actually they come in at 72 dpi. So I'm going to parent this here. I'm going to break this up. So that's going to be, so they're supposed to be 150. So it's 150 divided by 72 times 100%. Yeah, there we go. And then we can just bring that into line. And then one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do rasterize continuously. So that always just rasterizes everything, which means you can use vector art and it'll always rasterize. So then I can manipulate this layer just by itself. Well, if it wasn't parented, I could do that. And so I can change the position here. Oh, and I can put a white background there. Another one. So I can change this position of this layer. Of course, it's cut off, so it doesn't really make that much of a difference. But I could change, I could do another hue saturation, so we didn't quite like that color. We can, mess with it and make it, maybe a little bit orangier, and increase the saturation or whatever. You can keep playing with it. All right, we're gonna do another thing with this. We're gonna go put this on a shelf. So we just found this image. I just found it looking up Candy Aisle. We're going to see what the gummy monkeys look like on shelf. So we're going to save that image to the desktop. And I'll put it in the tutorial guidelines too. And then, doesn't really matter. We're just going to import it into After Effects. We're going to give it its own comp. And then create an element layer here. Go back to scene setup. I say this is a preset. So Say that box is a preset, so where's a basic box one? Look for it. There it is. Okay, cool. All right, now we're not even going to pay attention to it. There we go. It's huge. So we're going to create a new camera. Okay, and this looks like, I don't know, it could be actually a 35 because it probably was shot with an iPhone. Like most things. And of course, this is not at all a straight shelf. So we're going to have to turn this. Put it up here in the empty shelf here. And then we can do the same things we were doing before. Render settings, physical environment. We can brighten up the exposure a bit. Rotate the environment a bit. So then, of course, we can cut out the shelves here. Duplicate this. G. Remember, the pen tool is G in After Effects, even though it's P everywhere else. Cut that shelf off. Right, so that we can put that box in place. Now, what's actually kind of cool is then you can go in scene setup, zoom out, and we can, let's make this box too big, we can duplicate that. Blender again. You can select all of these and just make a nice set of them. So you have like a whole set in the store there. And I have no idea what size they really are, but because they don't actually exist in the real world. So there, you can see how they stick out against Junior Mints or whatever. But yeah, you can make them look like they're actually sitting in the store. All right, and then just one last thing we're going to do is I'm going to take that other design. You remember the blood rose design with the spot varnish, and create that in Element 3D. So we're going to duplicate comp 1, and we're going to call this blood rose. Open up, same box, but we're going to change the colors. The textures, actually. We exported this already for a previous tutorial. So I'm just going to go in there. And it was Blood Rose Ink. That one. So there you have it. I'm actually going to turn the glossiness down to like 50. And I'm going to turn the reflectivity down to like 1. So again, barely glossy. Okay. Let's hit OK. But of course, it's not what we want yet. So what we got to do is we got to take that other image, the varnish. Unfortunately, we can't, unlike Blender, we can't just grab the transparency. So we're actually going to have to create this. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to create a black layer, use the transparency, create another layer, and make that white. And then we're going to save this as a PNG, and we'll call it Blood Rose Reflect. Or actually, maybe Spec. And then actually we want a PNG out of that. And hit OK. So now we go back to After Effects. In Element, we can just drag it in there from the Finder. Blood Rose Spec into glossiness. And there you go. What's kind of cool is you can then alter, so we can actually raise the glossiness to like 80. Yeah, there you go. So you can see it really does look actually like a spot varnish. In fact, if you want a little gloss there, because now it's black, so it's giving no gloss, so you can actually do some color correction. So we can just lift this a little bit, so we get a little bit of gloss in there. Maybe 90. Maybe add a reflectivity of like 3 or 4. Yeah, maybe back down to 2. So I think you actually want to adjust this even further, so we get a little bit of gloss with the regular texture, but a lot of gloss with the other texture. And actually, I think that even looks better than Blender, I'll have to say. So there you go. Yeah, and then you can, as I said, like you can rotate the environment and it's reflecting the environment. And there you have it. Can hide the extra there, and remember it's always transparent. So you export this, put it on shelf. Looks very cool. Alright, so that's my second tutorial.